Okay, I now have the privilege of introducing our first keynote speaker, the Honorable Ted Cruz, Senator from Texas. Senator Cruz has served as Senator since 2013. He is the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space and has been a true bipartisan leader on the Senate Commerce Committee. Prior to being elected in 2012, Senator Cruz served as Solicitor General for the state of Texas. He's worked with the Federal Trade Commission and as an Associate Deputy Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice. Senator Cruz holds a law degree from Harvard and is a graduate of Princeton University. He served as a law clerk to the U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist. I first heard Senator Cruz speak at a 2018 ComStack meeting. He gave a powerful vision for the future of space exploration. And I'm sure you don't remember, Senator, but I actually ran out of the meeting after that and approached him in the hallway and said, "Do you have a moment?" And he gave me many moments, and it was a really fantastic conversation. But I knew right then I had to have him. So Senator Cruz has been one of the strongest champions in the Senate on commercial space issues. He has demonstrated tremendous leadership in working to resolve the regulatory aspects of commercial space. Senator Cruz has also been a great friend to aviation and to ALPA. After hearing him speak, I knew that we had to invite him here to be part of this conversation that we're having here today about integrating spaceflight into activities with aviation. So please, a warm welcome for Senator Ted Cruz. Great to see you.
Joe, thank you very much. Thanks for the hospitality, and good morning. It is good to be with all of you this morning. Captain DePete, members of the Airline Pilots Association, and members of the Commercial Space Federation, thank you for inviting me here today to speak about the important topic of integrating space operations into civil aviation. As I'm sure a number of your speakers here will point out, and as each of you know, the commercial space sector is booming. No longer is space just an uninhabited void or a scientific novelty. From GPS to communication satellites to weather and imaging satellites, space has become an integral part of the world economy in our everyday lives. It has become both the next frontier of exploration, international commerce, and economic growth. By some estimates, the space sector will grow to nearly $3 trillion in value in the next 3 decades alone. Indeed, it is my belief that the world's first trillionaire will be made in space. A belief that is being reinforced daily by the efforts of more established companies and new startups that are looking to engage in commercial human spaceflight, commercial remote sensing, asteroid mining, manufacturing in space, and other ventures that will ultimately open new U.S. markets in the final frontier. As you know all too well, the world of space looks very different today compared to the pre-space race world of 60 years ago. The United States and the Soviet Union are no longer the only players in space. Government space programs are no longer the only game in town. And our technological capabilities, both in terms of our ability to plan missions and what we are able to put in space, and for how long, and they are, for better or worse, exponentially greater than they were when the space race began. As commercial entities have developed new capabilities in and for space, many of which were inconceivable just a few short years ago, and the government has continued to leverage the commercial sector for data, launch services, exploration technology, and more, it has become increasingly important that the United States also create the kind of flexible statutory and regulatory framework that will help us maintain American dominance in space and allow the commercial sector, including commercial spaceflight, to flourish. A key factor in successfully creating the kind of flexible statutory and regulatory framework that commercial spaceflight will demand is how well we integrate commercial spaceflight and civil aviation. I believe that we can have a safe, efficient commercial spaceflight industry and also a safe, efficient civil aviation industry. I believe the two industries can and should work together in tandem. This past year, as chairman of the Subcommittee on Aviation and Space, I reintroduced the Space Frontier Act with my colleagues, Senator Sinema, Senator Wicker, and Senator Peters. This is a bipartisan bill that builds upon the U.S. Space Launch Competitiveness Act that I authored, that passed in 2015, and that President Obama signed into law. The Space Frontier Act seeks to establish a regulatory framework for commercial spaceflight by streamlining launch and reentry regulations for reusable and expendable launch systems. It would establish an Assistant Secretary for Commercial Space Transportation within the Department of Transportation to elevate the profile of commercial space issues within the department. And it would overhaul Earth observation regulations that haven't been updated since they were first created in the early 1990s. Additionally, the Space Frontier Act would mandate that the Secretary of Transportation undertake a comprehensive study of the current policies and tools used to integrate launch and reentry activity into the commercial airspace system, and to assess whether those policies and tools need to be updated to more efficiently and safely manage our national airspace for the level of commercial space activity that will occur there in the future. That comprehensive study, as laid out in the Space Frontier Act, is not only good for commercial space, but it's a beneficial approach for newer, non-traditional users in our aerospace, as well as for more established users, such as airlines and airline pilots. Unfortunately, as we all know, the Space Frontier Act fell just short of being enacted in the final days of the 115th Congress due to last-minute opposition in the House that formed despite the fact that the bill had just passed the Senate by a vote of 100-0. The problem with that outcome is that it's now been nearly a year since the Space Frontier Act was on the House floor. And airlines, airline pilots, commercial space companies are no closer to getting greater certainty or having more of a voice into how our national airspace is managed than they were a year ago. And you may have noticed the House is kind of busy right now. In fact, many of the individuals who are gathered in this room today are the ones who are feeling the greatest impact moving forward due to the House's failure not only to not enact the Space Frontier Act, but also its current disinterest in taking any meaningful steps to address this issue. The problem of having a growing number of new entrants and users in our national airspace, that problem isn't going away. In fact, the problem will only get worse if Congress and stakeholders sit back and wait. As the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space, I am prepared to address this issue now before it's an even greater problem, and to ensure that the United States not only doesn't lose its global competitive edge, but sets the global gold standard for how to manage complex airspace that promotes both commerce and safety. The same goes for modernizing the air traffic control system. I think we need to have a fresh conversation on that. A fresh conversation in Congress about how a new reformed ATC system, what it should contain, such as better flight plan management for general aviation, more direct routes for commercial flights, lower fuel consumption and emissions, which would be good for the environment, and lower costs for everyone, to more certainty for those who do the hard work of running the system. Those benefits are real and tangible, and they are win-wins across the board. Towards the end of restarting that conversation, I recently chaired the first in a series of hearings last month, examining the current state of the air traffic control system. 64 other countries have reformed their air traffic control programs, including Canada. I think we can learn from them about what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what should be avoided in developing reforms that reap the benefits without the pitfalls. As you know, efficient regulatory framework that ensures safety without stifling innovation and without disrupting the civil aviation industry is critical to the success of aviation and to commercial spaceflight. And in the past year, we have seen just how disastrous it can be when the regulatory environment doesn't work like it should. In March, I chaired a hearing on the Aviation and Space Subcommittee on the state of airline safety in light of the recent 737 MAX crashes. I wanted to seek answers to some fundamental questions, to know exactly what happened in both crashes, how 346 lives were lost, and what happened with the MAX certification so that we can understand what went wrong and make sure it doesn't happen again. And secondly, I wanted to look at aviation safety more broadly and identify where we can and should make improvements. Just this week, the CEO of Boeing testified in front of both the Senate Commerce Committee and the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee as we try to get to the bottom of what happened on these two fatal 737 MAX flights that resulted in the loss of 346 precious souls. The last few months, we have seen public reports that there was another previously undiscovered problem found with the MAX in addition to the MCAS system. We have found out that the assumptions Boeing was using about pilots were flawed. We found out that Boeing vetoed an alternative safety system on the MAX because of cost and training concerns. We found out that the FAA failed to properly review the 737 MAX. And we found that Boeing employees reported that they regularly felt undue pressure from management regarding safety-related approvals on commercial planes and had concerns about the coziness of the FAA and Boeing. In the past year, we've learned that there's always a danger, particularly when you're dealing with enormous companies that are subject of active regulation, of what's called agency capture, of the regulatory agency becoming too cozy, too much in bed with a giant corporate player. The truth is, the facts coming out about the MAX crashes, the culture of Boeing, and the regulatory process at play here are critical to understand more. These revelations reaffirm some of the initial concerns I raised, and frankly, some of our deepest fears about the systematic safety failures surrounding this aircraft and potentially others. We need to continue to investigate, continue to find out exactly what happened on these fatal flights and why. And then we need to determine what the remedy is, how we prevent this from happening again. In this instance, there seems there's a number of ways these accidents could have and should have been prevented. I can tell you that I take consumer safety very seriously. And I want to stress that we should always put the safety of the flying public first. After the second MAX crash, I advocated forcefully that the FAA step forward and ground those planes. That was the right decision. and I'm glad they did so. Across this country, millions of jobs depend on aviation, depend upon a transportation system that works effectively. And the critical foundation for that system is the confidence of the flying public. I fly commercial airlines several times a week. I live on airlines. All of us board planes with our families, with our kids. And the flying public needs to be confident that when you put your family on a plane, they're going to land at your destination. These regulatory failures have real and meaningful effects undermining public confidence. And that public confidence is critical for continuing the economic growth that has benefited this nation so fundamentally. I want to close by thanking the Airline Pilots Association for everything y'all do to ensure airline safety. And indeed, Joe knows this story, but I'll tell the rest of you. So my cousin was married to an airline pilot. My cousin, Bibi, was a Delta flight attendant. And her now husband, Marino, was pilot for Delta. And they're both Cuban. For a couple of years, other folks at Delta had been telling Bibi, you really need to meet this guy, Marino. He's a Cuban, you need to meet him. And Bibi is a loud, vivacious Latina. She said, I don't want to meet no stinking Cuban pilot. I'm not interested. I don't want to talk to him. 2 years she refused to meet him. Then she met him. She fell in love. They've been married over 20 years. They have 2 beautiful kids. So, in my family, we take great joy from airline pilots and the entire aviation community. And I want to thank everyone here for your leadership in this vital industry, but also your leadership going forward, that we address the real challenges facing us, that we address them proactively, and that we solve them so that we can continue to see brighter days ahead. Thank you.